The Stoics taught that the most important decisions you will ever make are not about wealth or status or ambition. They are about the people you allow into your inner life. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the quality of your mind is determined by what you give your attention to, and few things consume a man's attention more completely than the woman he chooses to love. This is not a script about blame. It is not about division or hostility between men and women. It is not a collection of complaints dressed in philosophical language. This is about discernment, about developing the wisdom to observe character clearly before commitment deepens and consequences become difficult to reverse. Epictetus taught that we suffer not because of what happens to us, but because of our judgments about what happens to us. And nowhere is our judgment more clouded than in the early stages of romantic attraction. When desire is high, we see what we wish to see. We explain away what disturbs us. We grant the benefit of the doubt where honest observation would counsel caution. The Stoics called this a failure of reason, not a failure of the heart, but a failure to allow reason to guide the heart. A man of genuine character deserves a woman of genuine character. Not perfection, no human being is perfect, but a woman who is actively working on herself, who takes responsibility for her emotions, who treats others with consistency and integrity. These 5 observations are not weapons for judging women. They are mirrors for examining the relationships you are building and the standards you are holding. They apply equally in reverse. A woman of character should apply the same Stoic discernment to the men she allows into her life, because the principle is not gendered, it is simply Stoic. Observe character, not appearance, not words, character. Let us begin. Red flag 1. She cannot take responsibility for her own emotions. The first character concern the Stoics would identify is a fundamental one. It is the inability to own one's emotional life. In a healthy relationship, both people understand that their emotions are ultimately their responsibility, that their feelings, while real and valid, are generated internally through their judgments, not imposed upon them by others. A woman who has not developed this understanding operates differently. She assigns responsibility for her emotional state to those around her. She says, in effect, "You made me feel this way. You are responsible for fixing it. You are the cause of my suffering." When she is unhappy, there is always an external cause. When she is anxious, someone else triggered it. When she is angry, someone deserves to be punished for it. The emotional weather of her inner life is always someone else's fault, always someone else's problem to solve. This pattern, observed clearly, reveals an undeveloped emotional life, not a malicious one, but an immature one. Epictetus spent his entire philosophical career teaching one thing, that between stimulus and response there is a choice, that no one can make you feel anything without your cooperation, that your interpretation of events is where your emotions are generated, and your interpretation is within your control. A woman who has never encountered this teaching, or encountered it and rejected it, will become an emotional burden to any man who loves her, because he cannot fix what only she can fix. He cannot regulate what only she can regulate. He cannot be the source of a peace that can only come from within her. And if he tries, he will exhaust himself. He will reshape himself around her moods. He will walk on eggshells. He will abandon pieces of himself to manage her reactions, and over time, he will lose himself entirely. The Stoic observation here is not that she feels deeply. Deep feeling is not the concern. The Stoic himself feels deeply. The concern is whether she takes responsibility for those feelings, whether she examines them, whether she works to understand and regulate them. Whether she says, in her honest moments, "This is my emotion and I must work with it," rather than "You must fix this for me." The practical sign is observable early. How does she speak about past relationships? Is there always a villain? Is every difficulty someone else's fault? Does she take any responsibility for how things unfolded, or is she perpetually a victim of other people's behavior? How does she respond to conflict with you? Does she engage honestly, acknowledging her part, or does she escalate, placing all blame externally? Observe this carefully, because this pattern does not improve with love or time or patience alone. It improves only when the person herself decides to take ownership. A woman worth building a life with has done or is actively doing this work. Take a moment. Reflect on the woman you are considering. How does she relate to her own emotional life? Does she own it, or does she expect others to manage it for her? Red flag 2. Her words and her actions are in constant conflict. The second concern is one that Marcus Aurelius addressed directly in his private writings. He wrote of the importance of consistency between what a person says and what a person does. Character, he understood, is not revealed through declarations. It is revealed through behavior. Through what a person does when doing the right thing is costly, when following through requires sacrifice, when keeping a promise is inconvenient. In the early stages of a relationship, words are abundant. A woman may speak beautifully about her values, about how she treats people, about what she believes in, about who she is. The Stoic does not evaluate her on these words. He evaluates her on the pattern of her behavior over time. Does she do what she says she will do? Does she follow through on commitments? Does she treat people, particularly people who can do nothing for her, with the consistency she claims to value? This last point matters deeply. Observe how she treats those beneath her in social or professional standing: waiters, service workers, people who have no power to benefit or harm her, because this reveals her actual character, not the character she performs for people she wants to impress. Seneca wrote that we should judge people not by how they behave when all eyes are on them, but by how they behave when no one is watching, when there is no audience, when the performance is over. A woman whose behavior changes dramatically depending on who is watching is not showing you her character. She is showing you her social strategy. These are not the same thing. Similarly, observe whether her self-description matches the reality you can observe. If she describes herself as patient but becomes immediately reactive when frustrated, this is information. If she describes herself as loyal but speaks casually about betraying others' confidences, this is information. If she claims to value honesty but habitually shades the truth to avoid discomfort, this is information. These inconsistencies are not small matters. They reveal the gap between the person she wishes to be perceived as and the person she actually is. Every person has this gap to some degree. We all aspire to be better than we currently are. The question is whether she is aware of the gap and working to close it, or whether she is unaware of it, or worse, indifferent to it. A woman of genuine character is honest about her own inconsistencies. She does not pretend to be further along than she is. She acknowledges where she falls short, and she takes active steps to align her behavior with her stated values. This is not perfectionism, it is integrity, and integrity is the foundation on which trust is built. Without it, you are building your life on performance, on a version of a person that exists only when circumstances are favorable and an audience is present. Reflect now. Does the woman you are thinking of show you consistent behavior across different situations and contexts? Does what she says align with what she does, not perfectly, but substantially? Red flag 3. She punishes honesty and rewards accommodation. The third concern is subtle. It requires careful attention, and it may be the most damaging of all. It is this: some women, perhaps without conscious awareness, punish honesty and reward people-pleasing. When you speak a difficult truth, when you maintain a position she disagrees with, when you decline to agree with something you do not believe, she responds with anger, withdrawal, or emotional punishment. When you accommodate, when you agree for the sake of peace, when you suppress your honest perspective to avoid her reaction, she responds with warmth and approval. Over time, a man in this dynamic is trained. He learns, through 100 small experiences, that his honesty causes pain and his accommodation causes comfort. And so he becomes less and less himself. He learns to manage rather than communicate, to appease rather than engage, to present a curated version of his thoughts rather than his actual mind. This is the slow death of authenticity in a relationship. The Stoics held honesty as one of the highest virtues. Epictetus said that the foundation of all wisdom is this: know what you think and say what you think. Any relationship that requires you to violate this foundation is not a relationship. It is a performance. A woman of genuine character wants to know what you actually think. She may not always agree. She may sometimes feel hurt by your honesty. This is human and understandable. But her response to your honesty will be engagement, not punishment. She will say, "I disagree, and here is why," or "that hurts, and I want to understand what you mean." She will work through the discomfort with you rather than punishing you for creating it. Because she understands that a relationship built on managed truth is not intimacy, it is theater, and theater, however comfortable, cannot sustain a meaningful life. Observe early whether she creates a space where honesty is welcomed or whether she creates consequences for it. Because if honesty is punished now, before commitment has deepened and stakes have risen, it will only become more punished later. A man cannot be himself in a relationship that requires him to manage his truth, and a man who cannot be himself cannot be happy, regardless of what else the relationship offers. The Stoic question to ask yourself is this: can I speak my honest mind to this woman, delivered with kindness and respect, and have it received with maturity? Or do I find myself editing, managing, and calibrating to avoid her reaction? Your answer is important information. Take a moment. In the relationship you are examining, do you speak your honest truth, or have you learned to manage what you say? And if you have learned to manage it, what taught you that honesty was not safe here? Red flag 4. She confuses intensity with depth. The fourth concern addresses a pattern that is frequently mistaken for passion, but is actually instability. Some women confuse the intensity of an emotion with its depth. They interpret high emotional charge as evidence of profundity. They mistake dramatic highs and devastating lows for a rich inner life. They believe that the strength of a feeling proves its validity. The Stoics would immediately recognize the error in this thinking. Marcus Aurelius distinguished repeatedly between emotions that are generated by genuine wisdom and values and emotions that are simply intense reactions to circumstances. The first type is the product of a developed inner life. The second is the product of an undeveloped one. A woman who confuses intensity with depth will bring a kind of turbulence to a relationship that is exhausting rather than enlivening. She will experience every disagreement as a catastrophe, every period of routine as evidence that the relationship is dying, every moment of normalcy as cause for anxiety about whether the connection is still alive. She requires constant emotional stimulation. Drama becomes the language of love. Arguments become tests of passion. Jealousy becomes evidence of caring. The relationship must constantly perform at a high emotional register, or she concludes something is wrong. This pattern is deeply tiring for a man who has done his own inner work, because emotional maturity seeks peace, not stimulation. It seeks depth, not drama. It seeks the quiet stability of genuine connection, not the noisy performance of intense feeling. Seneca wrote that the sign of an undeveloped soul is its need for external stimulation to feel alive. The developed soul, by contrast, carries its peace within itself. It does not need chaos to feel its own heartbeat. This concern is also deeply connected to the Stoic principle of equanimity, the capacity to remain centered in the face of both favorable and unfavorable circumstances. This capacity does not develop in a person who has learned to equate emotional extremes with aliveness. There is a practical observation here. Early in a relationship, intensity can feel intoxicating. The highs are extraordinary. The passion seems like proof of something real. But pay attention to the lows as well, because the same mechanism that creates the extraordinary highs creates the catastrophic lows. And in a life together, you will spend far more time in ordinary days than in extraordinary ones. A woman who cannot find peace in ordinary days will make ordinary days impossible to endure. A woman of genuine depth does not require drama to feel the relationship. She can sit in silence with you and feel connected. She can navigate a disagreement without it becoming a crisis. She can tolerate normal periods without interpreting them as signs of decline. This is not coldness. This is the fruit of inner work, of having built a relationship with herself that does not require constant external stimulation to feel whole. Reflect on this now. Does the woman you are considering bring peace into your life or turbulence? Is the emotional charge of your connection a sign of depth or of instability? And are you able to distinguish between the two honestly?
Red flag 5. She has no relationship with self-examination. The fifth and final concern is foundational. It underlies all the others. It is the absence of self-examination. The Stoics considered the unexamined life not simply suboptimal, but genuinely dangerous. A person who does not examine themselves cannot grow, cannot change, cannot take responsibility for their patterns, cannot understand why they keep creating the same suffering in every relationship they enter. The Delphic oracle's instruction was simple: know thyself. Epictetus spent his career teaching that the beginning of philosophy, the beginning of wisdom, is the honest examination of your own mind, your judgments, your fears, your desires, your patterns. A woman who has no practice of self-examination is, in a meaningful sense, unknown even to herself. She acts from patterns she cannot see. She repeats behaviors she cannot explain. She creates problems she cannot acknowledge because she has never developed the capacity to witness herself honestly. This is not a moral failing, it is a developmental one. It means she has not yet done the inner work that mature adulthood requires. The practical signs are visible if you know what to look for. Does she ever say, "I have been thinking about a pattern in myself that I want to change"? Does she speak about her own failures with honesty rather than with defensiveness or deflection? Does she show genuine curiosity about her own inner life, her motivations, her fears? Or is her attention always directed outward, always analyzing others, always diagnosing problems in everyone around her, always articulate about what other people should change while remaining opaque to herself? The second pattern is common. It is far easier to examine others than to examine oneself, because self-examination requires honesty about painful truths. It requires sitting with the knowledge that you have been wrong, that you have hurt people, that your patterns have caused the suffering you have blamed on circumstances and other people. This is uncomfortable work. Many people avoid it for their entire lives. But a woman who has done this work, even partially, even imperfectly, is a fundamentally different partner from one who has not, because she can say, "I recognize I did that and I am working on it." She can hear honest feedback without being destroyed by it. She can apologize genuinely, not just strategically. She can change because she can see herself. Marcus Aurelius spent 30 years writing a private journal in which he examined himself mercilessly. Not for a single day did he consider himself finished. Not once did he believe he had arrived at the level of character his principles required. He was seeking a woman who is on this same path, not perfect, not finished, but committed to the work, committed to knowing herself honestly and building her character deliberately. This is the woman worth building a life with, not the woman who has arrived, but the woman who is walking the road. Take a moment now. Does the woman you are considering examine herself? Does she acknowledge her patterns? Does she take ownership of her growth? And if she does not, are you willing to accept a life with someone who will remain as she is?
These 5 observations are not a checklist for judging women. They're a mirror for examining relationships honestly, with clear eyes, with the kind of discernment that emotion on its own cannot provide. Because the Stoics understood something that modern culture has largely forgotten, that love alone is not sufficient for a lasting, meaningful relationship. Love must be accompanied by discernment, by the honest assessment of character, by the courage to see what is actually present rather than what you wish were present. The man who ignores character in the early stages of a relationship does not avoid the consequences of that character. He simply delays them. And by the time the consequences arrive, his life is deeply entangled in circumstances that are difficult to exit. This is not the design of a happy life. It is the architecture of regret. But there is another observation that must close this conversation honestly, because Stoicism is always, ultimately, about self-responsibility. The man who repeatedly attracts women with these patterns must ask himself a serious question. Not what is wrong with the women he attracts, but what in him is attracting them. What wound, what need, what undeveloped part of himself finds these patterns familiar or comfortable or somehow irresistible? Because the Stoics would say, before you examine the character of another, examine your own. Before you catalog the red flags in others, examine why you ignore them. Before you ask what she needs to work on, ask what you need to work on. A man of genuine character, a man who has done his own inner work, who knows himself, who has built his foundation on virtue rather than validation, tends to attract women of similar character, not as a guarantee, but as a pattern. Like tends to call to like. The work you do on yourself is not just preparation for finding the right woman, it is the magnetism that draws her toward you. Seneca wrote that you must first become a good person before you can recognize a good person, that clarity about character in others begins with clarity about character in yourself. This is where all Stoic teaching returns, to you, to your inner life, to the person you are becoming through your daily choices. The 5 observations offered today are not a standard for judging others. They are a standard for understanding what a genuinely virtuous partnership requires. Observe character, not appearance, not performance, character, including your own. This is where wisdom begins, and this is where it must return, every time.